Welcome to my brothers. Welcome to the audience out there, the virtual audience. My name is Ihsan Hines from MBKCares. I'm joined by my brother Eric Marsh, one of the executive board members of MBKCares. Welcome to season number 3, episode 1 of Wellness Wednesday. We're joined tonight by 3 guests who were joining us last year when we had our very first episode. We found ourselves in the early stages or early phases of a pandemic. We still find ourselves in that pandemic at this time. And we thought that it was important to continue the conversation, but bring people back who were part of the original conversation and see how we're progressing and dealing with our mental health and just our experiences being Black men in a world where that can be a challenge sometimes. So I'm going to pass the opportunity to speak on to my brother Eric Marsh and let him continue the conversation from here. Welcome.
Well, thanks, Ihsan. I appreciate it so much. And again, this is going to be a collaborative effort, right? So we all going to join in this conversation. But for those who don't know me, my name is Eric Marsh. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Fathering Circle and co-host of MBKCares Wellness Wednesday. Thank you all for joining us again. This is the first episode of our newest season. And for today, what we're going to do is we're going to revisit the brothers' lives who are actually part of our initial episode that we kicked off last year at the beginning of the pandemic. I want to check in with them, find out what they have been up to, some of the struggles and strides they've been through, and the accomplishments. There's been a lot of great things that have come out of 2020, and the fact that we're all still here together, I think, is the first thing to recognize and acknowledge. But secondly, understanding that we're getting a chance to be here together and to learn from one another, and share with the larger community of those of you who are watching with us. I just want to say how grateful I am for my brother Ihsan being here and setting this up and continue to push forward, provide these resources to the community on behalf of MBKCares. And so I first want to start off with welcoming our guests and have them introduce themselves a little bit. And I'd like to start off with our first guest, Philip Roundtree. Phil, how you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
And I just peace to you, Eric. Peace to Ihsan, to Greg. Peace to Charles. You know, it's always good to convene with folk and just have good dialogue, good conversation. I mean, I still haven't mastered this little 3 minute 30 second. I don't know what the elevator pitch is supposed to be, but I haven't mastered it yet. Right. So just I'm just somebody who cares, man. I have these titles. Yes, I have these different hats that I wear, but I'm just somebody who cares about humanity and just doing my part in this quest towards Black liberation. So that's really all I got for you.
Hey, that's good enough, brother. We're not in an elevator and nobody trapping you behind these doors, so don't feel too much pressure. But I will say, the brother has been doing some amazing work for a very long time. So go look him up if you don't know who you're talking to. All right. Our next guest is Charles White. Charles, welcome. It's been a minute since we got a chance to talk to you. How you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey man, I'm doing good. I appreciate the opportunity to be back in the company of these brothers, man. I over the past year I have tried to pop in and catch some of the other discussions. So like I feel just seeing what this thing has become, what you brothers are doing, I feel even more blessed to have this opportunity to be a part of it again. We just been like I think most of us just in the house.
In the house.
I tell you, I kind of chuckled when the brother mentioned the elevator pitch because one of the changes that's happened in my life over the last year is that I have decided to let my sales job go. And so, like, I don't want to hear anything about elevator pitches or anything along those lines for a minute, man.
All right.
Yeah, man, I'm just glad to be here.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you.
I think I'm the only one not out there, Philly. So I want to go in Memphis, Tennessee. We in the house.
That's all right. Good. Memphis, Tennessee is good. I got some place to sleep overnight when I come that way. So
absolutely.
I'm gonna be hitting you up. All right. So next up is my brother Greg Corbin. We got to figure out another name for your intro. We can't do no more pitches, no more sales. Even though I do know you got a book, right? But up next, brother Greg Corbin, tell us a little bit.
I'm gonna speak. So my name is Greg Corbin. I have a new book. It's called Breathing Ashes. It's a poetic guide to walking through fire and coming out reborn. It is generally about a coming age process in my own life, using poetry, essay, about being an educator, about being a poet, about being an activist, an organizer, a nonprofit founder, an executive, and all these other moving pieces that God has granted me with. I agree with Phil. We're bigger than these titles that we put on ourselves, and those things get to weigh us down, sometimes trap us, and we don't know that there's something actually greater outside those names, those limits that we put on ourselves. So I'm a thinker, I'm a philosopher, I'm a dreamer, I'm a dream weaver, and I'm an MC, and I'm a poet and a storyteller at the end of the day. I love making sure that we don't stop dreaming. And something I've coined is I'm an imagination activist. I get people thinking, about the future. Because if we let imagination die, we have nothing else. Because that's what we're here to do, is create.
True. That's so deep, and I appreciate that. And on that note, I want to make sure that in terms of our conversation, we always want to lead our guests towards the end of the conversation and leave them with something positive, right? So we generally start off and talk about the challenges that we faced. This is again our first episode since we took a break towards the third quarter of last year. So we've been away for a little while. A lot of things have happened over the past year. And, when we first got together, we started talking about some of the challenges that the Black community and specifically Black men were facing. Little did we know that we were going to be in it for the long haul, much longer than anybody expected. And I think, Ihsan, you had done a little bit of research and looking at our previous episodes and saw actually some somewhat prophetic statements and some things that some of the guests had mentioned that really resonated with what happened for the remainder of the year. Anything that you saw in your review of the previous conversations that you want to ask the brothers to elaborate on now?
Well, absolutely. I know Greg was just speaking, but one of the things that he talked about last year, he was asked about like these spaces for men. I was asking Phil about the "you good bro." Is it "you good bro" or "you good man," Phil? I'm messing it up again.
Yeah, you good, man. It's all good.
You good man. And we were talking about how I come out to one of your "you good man" fellowships at Uncle Bobby's last year, and it was really decent to have that space. And then Greg, while reviewing what you were talking about, you mentioned that there's not a lot of places for men. There aren't places where we won't experience judgment, where we can talk freely. And your exact quote was, a lot of places for men, I'm sorry, there aren't a lot of places for men where ignorance was allowed. And like you were talking about how people are like policing the conversations that we have, and how it's important that we have spaces where we can talk without people policing if we said it the right way or if we use the proper jargon or whatever. And I thought it was really profound, because if anything out of last year taught us, we didn't just have a pandemic, we had a whole lot of uprising, a lot of other things. And we found ourselves in places where we need to be able to speak truthfully, allow emotions to be real, allow them to be expressed without people policing how we thought and we felt. So I thought that was really profound. I want to know, like, as this year played out, the last, when I say year, not just this calendar year, but the last 12 months, how do you see that statement? Is it still as true as it was when you said it then, or more true?
Yeah, it's just as true. Human beings are developing. We have language that we can use to describe how we want to identify, makes it even more complex. And everybody is out for their fiefdom. It's almost like territorial. It's no different than colonialism. It is colonialism. It's just with words. Oh, you didn't say it this way, so now I have to control the way you're performing and showing up in life without giving any context or any backstory. So no, I stand by it. Unfortunately, the way the game is designed, the way the structure is set up around power, is people internalize what they see through something called a parallel process, which I know Phil can go deeper into because he is a psychologist on this panel. But basically what it is that those who sit in a position of authority can actually pass down behaviors and attitudes. And so one of the things we've internalized in this structure around power and race is how to be colonist, is how to be territorial around things that we deem valuable and important. And so I totally get that. But a lot of it is really wired in our how we define safety and what resources we need in order to feel safe. And I'm not talking about just resources in a physical way. I'm talking about resources emotionally, socially, mentally, and spiritually. When those things are challenged and people get into a place of fear, it's easier for them for their trauma to play out. It's easier for that stress to trigger something. And now it's resilient because now the defense is up. You can't play offense and defense at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to say for that.
That's profound, bro, because like you've been on the journey for your own mental health and wellness. And I know like one of the things that comes up with therapy in particular is facing either abuse or negligence from the past. And if you can't acknowledge that those things happen, there's like limits to how far you can grow or develop or what you can even experience in your healing process. And I think that the things that you're talking about or the things that you've been experiencing as you matured have been clearly tied into being able to be honest with the man in the mirror. And I think that that's what last year really, really allowed us. I mean, just being a man, right? We always are faced with opportunities to grow. I think Phil really did a great job last year of expanding on that same thought. We brought up like, what are you doing as we were like 3 weeks into the pandemic? What are you doing to take care of yourself? And Phil just said, I'm doing what I've always done. Like basically, like, there's always something going on. There's always something going on. And it made me think about Pastor Waller from Enon. He had a quote that he said years ago. I was watching a sermon and he said something about Men in Black. And on the Men in Black movie, there was one of the guys, I forget his name. He was the mentor for Will Smith. And Will Smith was like, well, there's an intergalactic spaceship trying to get us. And the guy said to Will, there's always an intergalactic spaceship trying to get us or whatever. So when you said what you said last year, it made me think like, you're right. There's always adversity. And we didn't know dealing with the first few weeks of a pandemic that Ahmaud Arbery was to follow, that George Floyd was to follow. We didn't know that we'd later hear about Breonna Taylor. We didn't know about the uprisings that were going to happen. And then even within our own city, the Walter Wallace situation. And that's just like things that are outside of our households that impacted everything that's going on in our household. People lost jobs, people lost loved ones, all kinds of things as the year went on. Phil, I actually want to ask you, like, as you mentioned last year, like continue to do the things you already did previously. Are there any things that you did differently last year or continuing to do now?
I don't know. I made that statement, but you can't really prepare for you can prepare for things, but still you can have all the amazing preparation in the world and shit. I don't know if you could curse on here, but I'm gonna say it anyway.
Go ahead.
And I apologize. You know what I mean? Shit still come at you super difficult, right? And forces you to either adapt or to fold. And so for me, yeah, I had, all these what I thought was healthy coping skills and this mindset to adapt, but my will was tested just like everybody else's, right? Not being able to be around people. I'm so used to going to Uncle Bobby's. I made a post the other day, like, I miss putting in a shift at Uncle Bobby's, being in there for 6-7 hours, working on my work with other creatives and everybody that comes through there. And then I thought about it. Now I'm scared, right? I know I'm going to feel anxious because I'm not necessarily used to being around people. I go to the gym a few times a week, but I still, I isolate myself, right? And so I'm just I have tunnel vision, but going out in public spaces, like I'm not prepared for that. I couldn't have prepared for that prior to the pandemic. And
Right.
so now here we are. And so we'll have to deal with these anxiety symptoms. Do I trust myself? I do trust myself. Do I feel like I've experienced a lot in life that when things get tough, that I'm going to need to pull from that strength, that resilience. I hate the term grit, but grit from those moments for sure. Where I am now, I think I'm at a place of peace. Things in my life have changed, some for the better, some things, money got a little funny, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people. But again, man, I'm here. And I think for me, I always try and ground myself with that. I always, when I do sessions with clients, I'm also a therapist. Again, I wear like 1,000 hats. When I do sessions with clients and Greg and Ihsan, to tell you they've been to the group, I always start with what went well for you. Right. And sometimes it's difficult for brothers to say what went well, but I always try to go back to that basic. Listen, I was there. I just woke up, and it might sound corny and cliche, but I just try to bring myself there, and use that as a strength to hopefully springboard me to where, I'm in a place where in meeting that goal of thriving.
Yeah. Before I pass this, that was profound, bro. I really appreciate you. And just the fact that y'all are here, like that's really a survival, a testimony of survival. So I just appreciate y'all for being here and then still being yourselves, better versions of yourselves, of course. But I appreciate y'all. I want to make sure I salute y'all for that. Eric, I want you to continue the conversation if you can.
Yeah, well, I thought you might want to go to Charles with that same conversation, or is there anything that stood out for you from last year's?
With Charles?
Exactly.
Yeah, so Charles last year mentioned that he was frustrated with a lot of the content that was circulating on the internet. And I know that was early on because everybody was afraid. I was afraid. I mentioned that to you all, and I think Phil just mentioned some of those same types of feelings, not knowing what's going on. I thought at some point last year that the world was about to end. And Charles mentioned how like things were going on around the internet and how he was frustrated because I guess there was like misinformation or people expressing their feelings. And if that continues, like with even what Greg mentioned, you can kind of create a culture around what somebody's opinion is. There's religions established on it. There's laws established on it. There's all types of things. I want to ask Charles, like, how has your process or how has your year been since then when you were seeing those things being frustrations for you? Like, are you still experiencing the same thing or have you been able to filter things in a different way?
Well, I don't feel the same frustration.
Okay. That's a blessing.
I certainly don't feel the same frustration. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is I've just had to, and I know a lot of us have done this or do this, but I have to take breaks from it, and I have to be very particular about what I do and don't read or engage with. I might read the news story, but I will stay the hell out of the comment section. That sort of thing. And I also kind of like my thinking of it, my view of it has kind of shifted. I think the last time we were here, I shared that I had not long before started seeing a therapist for the first time, which has done wonders for me. One of the things my therapist told me about anxiety is that a big part of anxiety is what happens is we look at the situation and we start imagining the worst case scenario as if that's what's about to happen. And so in order to deal with that, what he told me was that it helps to think plainly and logically, even write it down. So if this bad thing happens, what really is going to be the result? Like what realistically can happen from here? And so, when I think about it in those terms, and I kind of view the entire thing as sort of this mass anxiety event, because it really seems like that's what it is, everybody's got this anxiety, understandably so. You talk about, hey, this whole brand new disease that nobody ever heard of, So when I started thinking about it as if, this is everybody having this anxiety attack basically about this thing. And we haven't all been equipped, like I have by way of the therapist, with a mechanism for dealing with it. And, you know, when I start thinking about it in those terms, it makes me less frustrated and more sympathetic, you know, because I really think a lot about what kind of stress folks have to be going through, you know, to where like every time I pick up my phone and I look, there's this thing that tells me something the complete opposite of the last thing I saw, and I don't know what to believe. And so I feel sympathetic towards that now. And for my own sake, I just really have made some adjustments to the way that I take that stuff in.
That's great. I the thing that I kind of want to touch on, and I appreciate you sharing that process, right? Again, about healing. You know, obviously 2020 was a year unlike any other, and many of us have faced a lot of challenges. I know for myself, I'm not even sure around the time that we first started sharing, but I shared with many of you that I had just lost my sister at this time last year. Had started an extremely stressful job, working in city government, left that job, you know, and part of that process, started a new job, changed the entire relationship and dynamic with my children, where I'd spent months without actually seeing my children, until we had got to the point where we finally, the fog lifted and I was like, oh, you know what, I can video chat with them. And so those little coping mechanisms that we come up with, I want you guys to kind of share a little bit about some specific challenges that you faced over the past year and what tips you used, what strategies you used to manage that, and what are some things that the folks that are watching can use to manage those challenges. And I think I want to go to Greg first, because I know there's been a lot of ups and downs. You have some really high highlights from last year that we're going to get to, but what is one specific challenge that you found you were dealing with as a result of the pandemic, and how did you manage that?
First of all, I think it's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the lack of boundaries when work started to invade the home space. Mm-hmm. When you work remote and the kitchen table is now your office and the living room is your gym, and now the bedroom is the office, and now the office is the baby space. And just for me, it just more so my boundaries were intruding on themselves. And so I had to be very, very strategic about my time management, which was already challenging me for the pandemic. I think that was really, really one of the things that really held up its space. And I think the other piece was the uncertainty when the uprisings happened. ATM machines are being blown up. You know, stores are shutting down for the fear that they may not, you know, be treated well, so to speak. Plywood is everywhere. There's these markers of impact of trauma and experience and stress everywhere. You know, trying to find a way to escape from that to create a new sense of normalcy. Those things were challenging, and they still are, because we're not out of the woods yet, if y'all paying attention to the news.
Yeah.
A vaccine doesn't change the rules of the game. You know, you still wear a mask, you still social distance.
Yeah.
So
what are some strategies you use to manage all of that?
I think I got better with organizing my time. I use something called ClickUp and sometimes Trello. Those are like great time management tools you can use. They're apps you can put on your phone or you put on your computer. That really helped. I think communicating my quiet thoughts to my wife really helped. Writing them down on paper. Sometimes I think I'm communicating. I'm really just having these quiet thoughts and I'm entertaining myself. I think that really, really helped. Like saying that I was afraid or that I have a moment of anxiety. And, you know, I think the breathing and stretching and being active as much as I can really help. And then, of course, my weekly appointment with therapy. My therapist, you know, shout out to Dr. Luff. He really, really helped me a lot. just understand and really process it and not run from the moment.
Mhm. Excellent. Phil, same thing for you. What is a major hurdle that you find yourself facing, and what are some strategies you use to manage it?
Yeah, I was sitting there trying to think, think about something that was, challenging, stressful. I guess for me, it was, dealing with the fiscal fallout of the pandemic, the uprising, and everything that was taking place. I'm a full-time entrepreneur. I mean, like everybody make their money off the backs of the people, but I really like depend on the people, right? These colleges and universities, I depend on them to pay my mortgage every month.
Mm.
And so that money, I had some engagements booked, and, understandably, they like, hey, we don't know what's going on. We got to pull this bread back, And so I went from having these engagements. So it's like, being an entrepreneur already is difficult, right? Especially when you're doing knowledge work. Like, yes, I sell my merchandise, but the bills get paid from me going to different places and speaking. And so with that taking place, it was just like, man, what I'm going to do, right? What am I going to do? Now, I already knew what I was going to do. My partner, she's living with me. She's been a great support. And I think the challenge with that was just allowing her to assist me in that manner. Now, I'm not some, egomaniacal individual. I have situational, my ego is situational when it arises. You know what I mean? And so it's weird situations too. It's not anything with money really, but I guess that idea of saying, hey, yeah, I'm not going to be able to handle my end. Can you look out? Right. I think that was just difficult in asking for asking for assistance. And some might say that's just endemic to men. Um, but with that, I had to quote unquote swallow my pride,
Mm.
right? And thankfully, I do have a partner who already knew before I had to say something and made it easy for me, and didn't shame me, and for where I am, because again, she sees what I'm out here trying to do, right? And so I guess for me, that might have been the biggest thing. And as far as just working through that, again, I will have to have those tender conversations with myself, those gentle conversations. And I feel, listen, man, it's okay, right? Like you don't have to be everything to everybody. It's all right. Like, look at what's taking place. Asking for assistance is cool. People want to help you because they love you, right? She cares about you. And so reminding myself of this, because we know, as Greg talked about, just these pressures of the world that are on the shoulders of Black men, right, from society and from ourselves. And so I think, when we talk about that, how did I cope through that? It was really being extra gentle with myself and just allowing others in a way that might not have been, I may have been comfortable with, but I knew was necessary if in order for me to continue on.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You touched on so many things that we've got planned on for upcoming episodes, right? We want to talk about this idea of masculinity, quote unquote, vulnerability, ego, and the ability to open up and ask for help. And I think that understanding that process, right? And that we oftentimes as men we associate our worth with our net worth, right? With what we're bringing in. If we're not providing, if we're not earning something, then that oftentimes impacts our ego. And so I really just can't tell you how valuable that is that you shared that, because I know that there's a lot of men who can't even necessarily articulate what you just said, but know it in their heart. That's just like, there's got to be something more to me than the money that I can bring into this household. And
Right.
so I would love to have you back to kind of explore that conversation a little bit further when we get
No
to
doubt.
the next episode. Ihsan, any other thoughts that you have before as we wait for Greg to come back on?
Yeah. So actually, I'm glad I do get an opportunity to talk about this same thing, because I'd already started the journey of going to therapy and like confronting some of my own mental health struggles. But early on, when we first had this conversation last year, I was only like a couple weeks into actually taking a medication. And I had thoughts about taking medication for a very long time that I didn't want to do. And then my cousin's husband, he actually told me about an experience where he took it for a period of time and how it helped him out a lot. So then I took his testimony and stood on the shoulders of him and actually took it, and it wound up being good for me. It wound up coupling or working in concert with my therapy to get different results. So I saw something out of that. So one challenge from last year that I was really grateful to overcome is like what Greg talked about, when the home had to become a classroom, and like having to had to relearn math that I hadn't done in a long time, because like it was a challenge doing like 6th grade math, you know what I mean? And not that I'm not educated or know what I'm doing, but we don't use certain tools all the time
Yeah,
that
you don't
kids are
use that
being taught all the time. And I had to like relearn in order to teach my son, but then also had to learn patience that I lacked to have as a teacher, because I wasn't a teacher. I'm still not a teacher. So the challenge that I had to overcome was being patient and not allowing opportunities that were very stressful to wind up being moments of abuse and tearing down my children. So I'm really grateful that I was overcome that, and also was able to realize that sometimes I'm the toxic person in the room or in a relationship or just in an environment. And that was a difficult thing to see, but it was so necessary, because for a very long time, I kept measuring the circumstances that were coming my way from failed relationships or from tension just with conversations with people. And I always see myself as the person receiving it and being the victim of somebody's not being able to identify me or see me fully. But I didn't realize like I'm not seeing other people fully. And some of that is like it goes along with what Charles said. Charles was able to actually witness that, you know what, people are afraid. People are in their own circumstances and have compassion on them. It took me actually seeing my own healing a little bit differently and my own brokenness to be actually have compassion on people more. And I'm so grateful that that came out of last year, that I am the toxic person in a lot of rooms, that I think that I'm coming in dabbing there and coming in a certain way. No, some rooms I'm in and I am the messy one. I'm the one that stinks and don't realize it. So that was a thing that I'm grateful that I got out of it, and that I'm able to now go into this year. And I'm looking forward to reconciling some friendships and relationships that are damaged because of that, and then letting go of some that are beyond repair, but recognizing that I did some things that caused some of those things to be damaged.
That's so, man, I hate repeating the same thing over there. Like, that's so powerful. But the reality is it is. Phil, I want to go back to you and ask you, just from your professional perspective, this idea of recognizing when you are the toxic one, right? The reality is that most of us, most people in general, are the heroes of their own stories, right? We all think that we're altruistic, that we're doing the right thing, that we've thought it out. What are some of the experiences you come across, and some advice that you can give to help men recognize, or at least self-assess, how you might be able to step back and judge whether or not you're the toxic one in this situation?
Or I mean, it's definitely a complex question, right? With even more complex answers. You know, we're talking about the ability for I hate to say species, but I will go with species, to be introspective in a world that consistently tells them that they're not, right? And so it's sort of like this self-fulfilling prophecy where, you know, you're not introspective, you don't do X, Y, and Z, and so that's what you become, right? I think one of the main things first we'd have to address is just this idea of mindfulness and just being present, like being in this moment. When Charles was talking about the idea of anxiety and how so much of our anxiety is rooted in things that happened in the past and what's to come in the future, but never what's taking place as of right now, which is 6:53. And first, it's impossible to be introspective if you can't be present in that moment. And what clouds that is our where we are, our emotional intelligence, where we are emotionally, right? Our ability to cope with whatever emotions that we're feeling. I was doing some research probably about last year about effectiveness in ways to communicate with men. And so what the study showed was that in order for men to be introspective, to think about how their actions are impacting others, they had you had to relate the situation to them, right? So it can't just be imagine how Jane feels, imagine how Tom or Malik feels. It has to be, no, remember that time when you were walking up the steps and somebody laughed at you because you fell back down the steps, right? And that invoked that type of situational remembrance invokes a memory for them to where they are able to relate to what's taking place. And so it's difficult for, and that's why approach matters, right? Approach matters. How we're talking with men about what's taking place, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, not, as Greg was talking about earlier, not in a way that's judgmental, even if it's not coming out in a way that's socially acceptable, right? Because again, what that causes for somebody to shut down, and there's no way that if you have somebody who's shut down, that they're going to be able to be introspective, because they're, where they are emotionally, they're at that point they're shut off, right? They're shut down rather. And so, when we talk about that, it's just important to really relate experiences. Like we was talking, prior to getting on, we were talking about the painting and a white woman who made a comment about the painting that I have. And again, she was just going off pure emotion, but I had to relate. We had to have relatable experiences in order for her to understand where we were coming from and for us to see where she was coming from. That takes time, that takes effort, that takes diligence, right? That's not something that's easily done. Sometimes you got to fight like hell to be introspective and to look at, what it is, the role that you're playing in a situation. And if you're coming from an upbringing where you never had to do that, it's going to be extremely difficult, right? And so, I guess to sum it up, I think, how we're communicating with people is extremely, extremely important. Because that, again, for a man who is, I hate to use the term quote unquote sensitive, but sensitive, right? Who wear their emotions on their sleeves, who's going to respond, have a visceral response to what's being said. It's important to be mindful. That doesn't mean you let them off the hook, right? And be accepting of what's taking place, but we have to be mindful about that approach. And likewise, they have to really, and again, I feel like it's cliche after cliche, they really have to do that internal work, right? To really take a step back and see, why is somebody saying this about me? Right? What am I portraying about who I am? What am I displaying behaviorally? How am I talking? How am I coming across? Right? Even if I feel like they're wrong, you know what I mean? I still got to take a step back and say, how could that be interpreted? So yeah, it's very layered when it comes to that. But again, the introspection piece, to get to the point and recognizing that the role that you're playing, otherwise you're going to be playing a role in a film by yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, I see you chowing down, but you got your finger. I know you want to jump in. You make sure you chew it all before you start. You're on mute too.
Yo, this cereal's so good right now.
I see you throwing it. I think you throwing it back. Good.
Like granola or kashi or something. All right. Phil, thank you for saying that. I think we often don't acknowledge the importance of creating space for people to be receptive to whatever that is. The introspection piece I thought was on point as well. It's not something that's actually taught in our culture either, right? Like we don't grow up with mindfulness inside of a school setting. Like that's now becoming a thing. To be present is now becoming a thing. I hear the word resonate a lot. It's hard for things to resonate with people when they're not present, right? So I appreciate everything you just said as it relates to why people may throw up the defense, why people may feel a sense of a threat or a sense of terror. when it comes to that. And I think it's just something we have to learn. We have to continue to incorporate inside of our culture, period, and how we interact with one another. It doesn't matter who you are, how you identify. I think the other piece is we are, in a lot of ways, I think a lot of people in my generation, we were raised in a way where we saw the world revolving around us. And so we didn't realize that sometimes we're happening to the world and the people around us. The way they experience us is sometimes things we can't see because we weren't taught to see through these different lenses, right? And so there's multiple ways of seeing this. You can see it through gender, you can see it through disability, you can see it through race, religion, through socioeconomics and class. You can see it through multiple intelligences, right? You can see it through all these different identities. But when I have that knowledge base, I'm able to be more empathetic. I'm able to be more compassionate. I'm able to build a conversation, a pipeline of communication that allows me to relate in the most genuine and authentic way. And what we have to do, if we really want to think, like get across these goals, these objectives of building a more inclusive society, grace, patience, and education, and understanding that it takes time for people to catch up. You'll have one group of people creating all types of different language, terminology that no one's ever heard, then attack people for not using it as if they were ever educated. And that replicates oppression, that replicates abuse, that makes a problem in the future, and so on and so forth. So we have to continue to think about what this can look like, but allow that grace and that patience to happen. And it's not easy. It's not easy because I understand the rules of safety.
Yeah, and I want to elaborate. I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that rules of safety, but I also want to go to Charles. But what you just brought up to me, as you both were just talking, the thing that came to mind was, as you all know, and I'm sure Charles, you're not in Philadelphia with us, but we're dealing with, again, horrible, out of control, insane levels of gun violence, right? And as you guys were talking, I was thinking about the video of the young man who was involved in a traffic accident while he was on his four-wheeler, and it was a 23-year-old man who was in his car and bumped into this guy while he was out doing wheelies and in the middle of traffic and doing all sorts of stuff. And a young man that was on the motorcycle went off, like just completely lost it, even though the guy in the car got out to apologize and got out to check on him. And so when we see that kind of behavior, as you were talking, it reminds me that where was this young man? Was he capable of being in the present moment? Was he capable of recognizing what was happening around him? And the fact that the person that ran into him was an accident. The fact that the guy got out of the car, he was showing some concern or some care. And does that even matter? How do we move from where we are with so many people not being present, not being able to assess their internal dialogue and where they are, whether or not they're acting out? How do we get from what we're seeing in society now to this idea of being more conscious, particularly as Black men? And the reason why I'm saying that is because the incident I'm sharing with you guys occurred between two young Black men. How do we begin to share and inspire and create those kinds of environments that people can then become more self-reflective? Is it solely on the responsibility of the individual, or is something that we can do collectively? Charles first.
Well, first let me say, unfortunately, I can relate to the gun violence issue. I think Memphis has been reported to be one of the more dangerous cities in this country. And a lot of it going on here too. So I understand. I relate there. And I used to, well, not used to, I still do. I tell people sometimes that a lot of times we want to make somebody understand something that we might feel or know to be true. And we get frustrated because they don't want to receive it. At that point, we have to ask ourselves, how badly do we want them to get it? Mm-hmm. And we have to accept the reality that there are going to be many times where you want them to understand a whole lot more than they care. And so if we want them to understand, then it is on us, individually or collectively, to find a way to get through to them, to reach them. Because frankly, a lot of times people aren't going to want to do the work as much as we know that they need the work, that we need the work collectively. And so it's a thing that we all have to kind of model individually and in groups, even small groups like this of like-minded individuals, in order to maybe formulate some new methods and mechanisms of reaching out, because we can all make some effect individually. And one of the things that the internet has taught me is that no matter what you're on, you can always find somebody else who's going to be on it with you. So there are like-minded folks out there, and we can take that same process that we apply individually to a group level, if that makes sense.
Look for like-minded individuals. I want to touch on, I want to go back to Greg and something that you said about safety, right? In relation to doing this work and in relation to, trying to create those groups that Charles is talking about, those like-minded individuals, and connecting with them, bridging that gap. Where does what you said about safety come into play?
I think first thing is keep yourself safe, right?
Say it again. Say it again.
Keep yourself safe. You got to keep yourself safe, right? I remember breaking up fights in my 20s. And I remember it was a sister I was dating, and I told her about it. She said, "You need to watch yourself. You can get hurt. You might end up getting killed." This is like 2007. Yeah, I'm like, I'm a hero. I'm gonna break up fights because I saw my dad do it. Different times, different era, different environment. And I remember feeling like she don't understand me and ... And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I broke up a fight. Like I literally just pulled over 39th and Lancaster. It was these dudes pursuing this young lady. And it was these other girls coming after, about seven young adults coming after this one sister. And I said, "Yo, get in my car right now." She was walking to the chain store, and I knew she was in danger because she didn't even ask me any questions. And they was like, "Who is that?" And this is where I messed up at. They thought I was her uncle or even her father. I engaged. That almost went south. These young boys was like, "Oh, hey, what?" And then I said, "Man, you don't know who you talking to." I don't give it. I'm looking at the numbers. I'm like, this don't end well for you, Greg. Mm-hmm. And I literally had to talk them down. And I remember trying to navigate the situation. Like, listen, y'all, I can't let y'all do that, man. I can't let y'all do that. And I saw the groupthink playing out. And oftentimes in those moments, they're going to lean to their peers, even if what they're doing might be dangerous.
Yeah.
Even if it's opposite of safety. Yeah. And even me doing work in reentry, I noticed that it's hard for people to get out of that life, so to speak, being involved with the streets, trying to get their needs met, when their relationships and their peer groups are connected to safety, even though their peers are in the proximity of danger because they haven't evolved to a place where they want to get out of that life either. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, I'm thinking like all these things like, yo, I might get beat up. My wife is in a car. Mm. At that moment was my fiance. My wife is in the car. Mm. And I somehow got them to back off. Mm. But I was trying to like, yo, I'm trying to help you. Like, and the one sister was like, don't touch my friend. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So now I'm picking up all the cues. And in that moment, I was like, that's the last time I'm going to break up a fight. I dropped the young lady off. They did get a hit off. They like, I walked to the car, because what made me, now it's coming back, what made me actually go to them is this one kid picked up this giant rock. This giant rock, and was about to hit my car. I said, no, we not going to do that. But this whole time, I'm like, this could go so south. Because I'm from the school of thought. If you roll on me, I'm going to kill somebody. I'm going to hurt one person. I'm poking an eye. Somebody getting it. Y'all can get y'all hits off. That's the school of thought I'm from. And yeah, y'all might, somebody going to get it. I don't care what your age is, I'm going to lose all that. Because now I'm in survival mode. And I'm just an honest person that's going to say it. You know, just so many things that play out in our communities. And I remember,
come from? I don't want to, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just, it begs me, like the question is just standing there, right? Because whatever the situation that led to that incident, right? Where does that lack of control, that kill or be killed mentality come from for the young people that we're talking about? But of course, we know that there's no boundaries to it. It doesn't stop with young people. But in this example, right?
Even me. I say even me in that moment, right? I'm doing my best, like trying to stay out of that his space. Like, yo, if they go off of me, one person gonna catch it, right? Because it's here you are, the sacrificial lamb, and you got a wife, you got kids you want to have, you got a life in front of you, and it's just tough because it's about survival. That's where it comes from. And that group of young people, you know, they were just being what the environment taught them, you know. And luckily, before I left, we were in a good space. They still wanted to beat the girl up, though. It was really just one girl they wanted. It wasn't the guys. The guys was, you know, they weren't helping. I'll say that much. But that freaked me out. Like, there was two girls, there's two guys in pursuit of this one girl because over this other girl. It was just crazy. And where does it come from? It comes from previous generations not knowing how to handle conflict, not having the emotional intelligence, the effective communication skills, the lack of restorative practices, the lack of transformative justice. Those things were practiced in community, but they look differently. It looked completely different. But at some point, the disconnects became extremely wide. The gap became wider, and the boundaries became less and less and less. The thing I look to most when I think about boundaries of when and where people engage with acts of violence is social media. If you think about how boundless social media is, if I'm growing up and 7 years old and I'm always on social media and I can just go to a person and get a response, I can just see a celebrity live their life. There's no more hiding. So now it's this call for transparency, right? Which leads us to these conversations that we're having.
Yeah.
So, you know, sorry I went on a little tangent.
No. It's absolutely,
but keep yourself safe no matter what you're doing, and do your best to know when to engage. Like you just mentioned with that guy with the four-wheeler. He's not in a headspace. You got to acknowledge that. As a person that wants to mediate, that wants to get the best out of humanity, you got to acknowledge if a person's not in position to receive the message, is the message worth delivering?
It's funny you say that. I'm sorry. And the reason why I had Greg, you know, emphasize the safety piece, and everything he's saying was, you know, on point. Probably about 2 days ago now, I was in the gym, and you know, it was one sister, you know, she was blessed, right? And I see a brother's like sneak recorder, right? And so, you know, I'm just like, yo, that's crazy. Like, it's part of the idea of rape culture. That's assaultive behavior. However, I'm not saying nothing to him, right? I posted it on social media that, you know, about what took place. You know, my point was to emphasize rape culture and assaultive behavior. And people was like, you ain't say nothing to him? They were like, Men got to hold other men accountable. And I'm just looking around like, I don't know that man. Right. And so in situations like that, like Greg was discussing, you can have the most noblest of intentions. That doesn't mean they do. Right. That doesn't mean that they have the wherewithal to be able to digest in what's taking place. Especially if I was to come to him and say, listen, that's assaultive behavior, that's not cool, or what have you. First response would be, who the F are you? Right now, here we are. I'm trying to diffuse the situation. And so, I bring that up to just talk about first that safety piece, right? Because, I ended up deleting it off social media because I'm like, nah, y'all not gonna just come for me, and I'm sensitive. I know me, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sensitive. I don't like people coming at my neck, right? But also, it was just like, you really have to do a cost benefit analysis in these situations, and I think that's what's lacking a lot of times, where this ability to navigate one's emotions. I mean, we spoke about it a little bit, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but just having that sense of awareness. And I think it's even more difficult for men and for Black men right now, where we talk about, you have believe women, whatever that means. Then this idea of protecting women. And if you don't, how you're going to be viewed and potentially be a pariah just because I didn't engage with another brother in a behavior that he was doing due to a legitimate fear that exists, right? And so, again, just this point of safety being super important when it comes to these types of situations. We can't just automatically assume that everybody has the same level of vulnerability and transparency and cognitive wherewithal that we have, right? I mean, when we look at the gun violence that's taking place here in Philly, and I mean, Memphis was on first 48. You know what I mean? So when Charles said Memphis, I said, oh, all right. I watch First 48. I see what goes on in Memphis, right? And how, the unhealthy depiction of Black folk on that show. I'm not as optimistic, right? And it's not and that doesn't mean I don't think the work needs to be done. I definitely think the work needs to be done at an earlier age, right? In the schools, in the community, because once you get to the age where that guy who was on that bike, right? Chronologically, he's 25, 26. But in coping with unhealthy coping skills and emotions, he's like 65, 70. And we know how difficult it is to get an older person to change their viewpoint if they've lived one way for as long as they have.
And if socially, he may be, 12 or 13.
Exactly.
Right? In his
exactly.
coping, he's at opposite ends of the spectrum and in his skill set.
Exactly. So it's important to be mindful of that, right? It doesn't mean you don't try with the 25 and 30s and 40s and 50s, but it's recognizing, all right, you know what? We got to really be hyper focused on the earlier generations, because when they're gone, hopefully we have some individuals who aren't behaving and coping in an undesirable, unhealthy manner.
Yeah, I know. I want to go to Ihsan before we go to Greg. Greg, I know Greg's got to leave early, but Ihsan, you've been waiting to get on for a second, so go ahead. Tell us what you were.
I had a thought that got expanded on even more after hearing what Greg said, because I think that most men could benefit from being able to recognize a moment where they took a loss or took a quote unquote loss, but it was for the greater good. When Greg said that he had a moment to say, like, this isn't going to end well, to take inventory of the circumstances around him, that's decent. I've been in that situation before where my pride took a loss, but I'm alive. You know what I mean? And I think that most men should actually have that type of perspective. And I think that if young men had that type of lesson being taught to them, like, Greg, you got to go to take care of fathering duties. Those are the things that I think are important as men are taught by their fathers. Like, teach your sons one thing, teach your daughters something, just teaching them respect for people, consideration, to be empathetic, to be sympathetic, but also just to read the room. You know what I mean? And I think that what you said, Greg, speaks to like some of the circumstances we see with mental health playing out with even with policing. Last year with the Walter Wallace situation, a young man could have gone home had he had the certain tools or maybe the wherewithal to be able to walk away from the situation. Or there was another guy who reached in his car last year and he got shot in the back by the police. I don't remember what state that was in, but your mind should tell you not to do this right now in this moment. The odds are against you, like you're outnumbered, and you're also dealing with a beast that wants to take you out. And I'm just glad that you spoke about the greater good. Your family now still has you. And I'm not saying that death was there, but something unfortunate was probably there for you if you kept going in that direction. So I'm just glad that you brought that up. I wanted to talk about what Charles said about the like-mindedness thing, because last year brought up so much racial tension in this country. And I don't think the change necessarily happens by just speaking to like-minded people. I think that the safety and the being able to have a place of release takes place there, but the growth and the things that need to change need to happen with people who think opposite, because we need to come to a place where we're thinking in each other's shoes. Y'all ever see this rap video? I forgot the name of the guy, but it's like a black guy and a white guy. They're having like a really racially tense.
Yeah.
Phil, you know who that is? You the hip hop head. I know you know who I'm talking about. Phil, you know who the guy is? I can't hear you.
What's the prompt? Say it again.
The rapper is a black and a white.
Yeah, the two guys are like sitting across a table having a conversation, right?
Jordan something, right?
That video.
Joyner Lucas.
Joyner Lucas.
Joyner Lucas. So that right there,
Nice.
That's not two like-minded people, but it was a place of understanding that they reached, right? And I think that certain conversations need to be had with people who don't think the way you think, because that's how you change the world. You know what I mean? That's how you learn to understand and put yourself in other people's shoes. Because if we don't have those conversations, nothing's going to change. And I think a lot of things from last year showed us that the sympathy was short-lived. Like that sympathy went away real quick and the narratives are gone. Like we're right back to where we were before. But the like-minded conversations keep us supported so that we're not discouraged looking around saying they're not talking about us, they don't care about us anymore. We can say, all right, we care about us and how are we going to make our communities better? But the changing conversations need to happen with people who don't think the same way. Greg, I wanted to ask you a question before you get out of here and actually highlight something you wrote. I read your article. I don't know if it's an essay, an article, but something that you wrote about Tupac, and it was special. Can you tell me the name of that article again? I forget the exact title. It's in the book. Oh wow, it's an excerpt from the book.
So it's a piece called Tupac. It's called let me get it. Tupac's Escape Plan, an ode to the Bishop of Juice.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was I think my thought process behind that is what if Tupac had therapy?
Mm-hmm.
What if old dirty bastard had therapy? What if Biggie had therapy? Like, do you understand? Like a week before Biggie got killed, he was on Rap City with Joe Clear talking about he was afraid. Like that was the first time I ever heard a black man in hip hop say I was afraid. Like he at that moment sad to say he lost his street cred too, because the way hypermasculinity presents itself, especially in the 90s, you can't tell nobody you're afraid. He's on TV, one of the biggest artists, period, in the world. Well, I'll say in the country, saying he's afraid. And so I just thought about, what if Tupac had therapy? Because he was before Juice, there are many accounts that he was different. Juice led the birdie and above the rim, right? Like they're similar. Bishop and Birdie are similar. And here's Tupac giving himself away to these characters. And so I often thought about art is a needs assessment for what we need mentally, emotionally, spiritually. We just skip over the track. We don't listen to the song. We think a person is just escaping through the music or creating for commercial profit. But it's actually something there. And so the article like really dives into what that would look like and really taking you through this trajectory of talking about the things that were happening in Tupac and how much he was being attacked by the media and how is it possible did he lean into being Bishop because that was the way he found safety.
So Greg,
right?
Greg, I want you to continue that thought, but you know what? People are acting out characters in our community every single day, and they may want to trap in that act. You know what I mean? So you're talking about somebody whose job it was to play a position as Birdie, but there's people who are just in their circles being challenged to be a certain way, and they may never escape without circumstances forcing them to stay there. They may wind up with jail, a prison record, like may wind up with a body on them. They may wind up with a disease, unfortunately having a child at a young age. All types of things may wind up being changes for their circumstances that they no longer can escape. So I think what you're talking about lines up not just with acting, but just with a young man being trapped in a character.
Exactly. And think about trap music. Think about our environments.
Mhm.
Think about how trap music is really a response to traumatic experience for structural oppression and racism.
Mhm.
A lot of that music, a lot of us probably wouldn't agree with the lyrics, but when you dig deep, you're like, yo, I hear some manic depressive things happening. Like who says some of the stuff that people get away with in these songs? Like the Spot 'em Got 'em song, they got everybody doing this. They like they King Tutton. The lyrics are crazy.
Yeah.
Like the lyrics are crazy. It's fun to turn up, but like, what are we turning up to? Right. And so I'm that old dude now that's talking about the subconscious mind and how things get leaked into your imagination, and so be it. And people want to critique that, so be it, but it's the truth. And I had that music too. I think the difference is I had more people around me to help guide me. And I think there was a boundary we wouldn't break. There was a ceiling we wouldn't crack. There we did have our friends that definitely took that music and went somewhere and did something, that was deemed insane or unsafe. Even in the article about Tupac that you're bringing up, I talk about how it was a guy, he killed the police officer in Texas, and he blamed his lawyer blamed it on the Tupac's music. That's in the article. When you read what I wrote, you'd be like, oh snap. So Tupac had heat coming from Dan Quayle, the vice president. Like if you think about who he was in 91, 92, 93, 94, until he gets shot in 96, there is a trajectory he's following full of paranoia. I'm not Phil as the professional, but somewhat maybe schizophrenic. Definitely some depression, right? In accepting the role of being that angry guy. And we all play roles and we play a performance. And Tupac was a thespian at his best. He was an amazing artist. I just wish he would have had an escape plan similar to Michael B. Jordan. Because Michael B. Jordan was able to go to therapy. Lakeith Stanfield, he was able to go to therapy. Tupac, we didn't create the climate in our community. We weren't there yet.
You had a quote from your book where you said Tupac was an artist searching for refuge in the chair of a therapist that he didn't know existed. It's challenging to identify a practice that isn't practiced in the community you reside in, if only mental health was an established practice in communities of color. I think it's profound, man. And you had me looking at art and then the artist in a different way. And God bless Tupac. He died at 25, 24 years old. He was a young boy. He was 26.
He might have been 25. I know him and Biggie.
25, yeah.
25. Biggie was 26.
Young boys.
I think they was both 24.
And the things that they did in that little bit of time, like just to look right now, Jay-Z's probably 50 or a little bit over 50.
Might be 52.
And he's had like 20 years of being able to create music, 20 plus. Can you imagine the kind of things that Tupac would have done? He did all of that stuff within a few years.
But
you put in your article, he wrote like 7 songs a day.
Look how Jay-Z has transformed himself, his life, his image, right? All of those things are possible if Black men are given the opportunity to just survive and live long enough. I think that's one of the things about our culture and American culture in general is that you can't change. People don't want you to change. You don't want to be that. People don't want you to adapt and grow and be different because folks want to keep you within the box that they're familiar with. So Greg, again, I know you got to go. I just wanted you to share, tell folks how we can find your book. Tell folks how we can contact.
Take the blur off, man. Take the blur off.
That blur is blocking your title.
Let me take the blur off real quick. I got to take my blur game off.
You got, you can drop it down a little bit to put it right.
I love the blur, y'all. I love it.
Push it closer to the camera. There we go. Breathing Ashes.
So Breathing Ashes, a poetic guide to walking. Got the sun in here. Poetic guide to walking through fire and coming out reborn. It's on Amazon. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can inbox me and I'll give you more details. So I really appreciate it, y'all. It's full of essays, some poetry, some quips, I really address masculinity, trauma, the impact of trauma as an artist. I have a space in there where I talk about Confessions of a Poet, where I just get open and honest, talking about, wow, I was performing my trauma for years and people applauded it. That engaged me to stay stuck in a certain thing. When I started saying no to that, I didn't want to be that person no more. I started saying no to people around me, and I ended up losing some people and gaining some people, you know, because I just didn't want to be trapped in this person that in some ways I felt it was, I want to use my I statements. I felt like I was perverting my pain and not really dealing with the root issue. And that's the most radical thing that I've ever done, is really digging deep down and saying, what is really going on? You know, and so the book, it explores a lot of those things: love, marriage. It's a nice gumbo of things, and I hope that this coming of age book of Breathing Ashes really helps people. The point of Breathing Ashes is also about, I call it the inner phoenix. Are you willing to embrace transformation, to confront yourself, to look into yourself, have a deep dive and deep conversation, interview your gifts and interview your talents, interview your weaknesses and your growing edges, and really be honest what you need to change, how you need to adapt in order to have a more harmonic experience with the world. Harmonic, not demonic, harmonic. So with that being said, I appreciate the time, y'all, and the space. I love connecting with y'all and having these conversations. So thank you so much. Breathing Ashes is on Amazon.com. Inbox me for more details, and I'm available for speaking gigs and things of that nature, as well as performances.
Hey, Greg, we want to gift, I hope, Eric, you co-sign with me on this, but I want to gift our viewing audience, 2 members of the audience, copies of his book. But I want to ask them to inbox the MBKCares Facebook page, inbox us, Breathing Ashes, and just like write a sentence, something you would like me to send to Greg in response to what you've heard from him tonight. That's the only cost it'll be to whoever you are out there. There's going to be 2 copies of this book given to 2 people, 1 copy to 2 people. You inbox Breathing Ashes and then just write a sentence or 2 that you want me to relay to Greg, something that you got out of what he said tonight. Greg, we appreciate you for being here. I really love what you're doing with your life and also what you're doing with your family, your creative ability, all of that. Thank you for lending your voice to this conversation.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, y'all. Y'all be well.
All right, brother. Thank you.
All right, peace.
Now, what I want to do, because we've been focusing on, Biggie, Tupac, art and culture. Phil, I don't know if you've had a chance to talk about this on camera before, but we got a chance to talk about it before the show started with the artwork behind you.
Yeah.
I can't let our conversation go across those 2 iconic individuals without addressing the piece behind you and the story you shared. Can you want to share a little bit about what's happening with the piece behind you, the artist that created it and the story that inspired it?
You say it all. And I know for some people it might be triggering, right? And I'm empathetic, to that. Because suicide is very real, mental, dealing with mental health and, the symptoms and what have you can be a daunting task and just extremely difficult. But this painting, when I first saw it just, I was taken aback, just like everybody else was when they first said, like, here you have, this gun and, simulating suicide, right? The artist is an artist based here in Philadelphia by the name of Justin Watlington. He goes by the blind artist, the blind artist, because he has one eye, like literally he has no vision in one of his eyes from an accident that happened when he was in his childhood. Again, trauma, that's a traumatic experience. His upbringing, both of his parents are deceased due to traumatic reasons, right? And so, we have this thing, and not just in the Black community, but when it comes to men in general, right? This idea of creativity. Unless you're painting like this, then your drawing is not in the cards for you after the age of 14, 15, 16. You're definitely not going to be just getting a coloring book and coloring. That's why it's, I had an event where I had adult coloring with men. My homie Rashawn in North Carolina, he frequently has adult coloring with men and women and non-binary folk, because we recognize that it's a great outlet. Creativity is one of the original ways that we've coped as a people. Thinking about how amazing some of our old Negro spirituals are, right? And how amazing they sound, how we took the blandness of their songs, right? And turned them into something amazing. We're just creative beings. And so he stopped painting for a while. In his mid-20s, he started back to painting. And I got this maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. He painted this picture, and it's called Suicidal Thoughts, because on Biggie's Ready to Die album, he has a song entitled Suicidal Thoughts. And maybe I'm 37, so Biggie is not, he's more of my brother, God bless the dead. His type of artist, and around that time period, that 94, 95, something like that. I was just a kid, so I know the songs, One More Chance and all of that, but I hadn't heard Suicidal Thoughts until a few months prior to getting this painting. And so I'm listening to Suicidal Thoughts and I'm replaying it over and over and over again. And Biggie is just sitting there being vulnerable. He calling Puff up, talking about people don't love him, his girl, his family, and he just wants to end it all. And I've just kept replaying it because it just spoke to me in a way. And then this painting just happened to pop up, and I'm like, yo, I need it. And so, the Most High, he allowed me to win a couple shillings, one time, and I was able to get the painting. And it signifies the creativity that's lost due to gun violence, whether it's suicide, whether it's the cliche, the white invented black on black crime. But it just highlights what's lost. And that's what the myriad of colors that you see is. That's actually his hand. He has his hand tatted up like that. And again, he's somebody who found a way to transfer what he was experiencing in his own life onto a canvas, right? And so it's just like, this is like 6 of 15. It's 6 of 15. Like Shaq has one. He's an amazing painter. He pays for Pacquiao and so many other individuals. But it was just, for me, it's something, especially the work that I do, talking about Black mental health and Black men's wellness. It was just something that I had to have, just because the story is even more important than the actual painting.
Exactly.
You know what?
Yeah. Go ahead,
Can I just, if I may, I just want to say the thing that struck me about the painting, it wasn't the gun or the colorful splatter. It's the lack of emotion on his face. This whole time I just kind of been wrestling with it, like, what do I think that means, But that is what I can't take my eyes off of. It's almost, I don't know if I'm resigned to this because it is what it is, or if it's I truly don't give a fuck, or what it is, but like or even if it's just that, what we now call toxic masculinity, that says I can't show y'all that I'm afraid. That just struck me.
Yeah, it's the first time, and that's the beauty of it, right? Because you give me that perspective, so now I'm looking at it, right, and attempting to see what it is that you're seeing, and now I'm seeing a whole bunch of different things with regards to it. So again, that's the purpose of this painting. This is the purpose of art, even if it's super triggering and what have you. It's meaningful, right?
Yeah, I definitely feel like that we don't examine our art and culture enough, particularly in the Black community. We consume so much of it. But how often are we actually taking the time to really look at the what's lies behind the surface and what is it feeding us? We talked earlier about this idea of you know what we consume and whether or not it's healthy or not. I had this conversation earlier with someone who was referring to a news and information desert in our communities, right? And that we're not, a lot of times in our communities, we're not even hearing the stories of our own community, whether it's good or bad, but we're letting other people outside tell our stories. And so we're only consuming what other people decide. Very similar to a food desert, where we're only consuming unhealthy ingredients and not things that are wholesome and fulfilling. And so again, I think I'd love at some point to continue this conversation in examining art and culture, because on my screen, I see the contrast and the comparison between the piece that you have behind you, Phil, and the piece that Ihsan has behind him, honoring his brother's life. And I really think that, again, it's so dramatic, it's so powerful in that piece that Charles just shared about that performing acts of masculinity, and that you can't express yourself, you can't express those emotions. The piece that Greg shared earlier, I think it was Greg or Phil, who talked about Biggie's last appearance on TV and him saying, admitting fear and then being murdered a few months after that. I think there's something in there that as Black men, we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't stop and to begin to pull those things apart and have a public dialogue around them. So thank you for sharing that information, and thank you for elaborating on that photo. Ihsan, go ahead. You wanted to share some things.
There's a couple resources I want to share, like for suicide prevention. While we brought up that topic, I actually noticed that painting last year when we had you on, and it did touch me in a certain way because my brother died from suicide or died by suicide, and I never actually thought about just asking. So it's a major breath tonight to just hear the explanation or the meaning behind it, because it makes it less like offensive and personal to just hear what's behind it and have an honest conversation. But with that said, I still don't know if there's other people out here who it may bring up a trigger or whatever. I just want to offer a couple of resources. First of all, MBK Cares, we are a nonprofit organization for mental health and suicide awareness and prevention. But I also now serve as the co-chair for the AFSP, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Philadelphia chapter. I serve as the co-chair for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion board. And with that, there's a bulk of resources for our community, particularly for people of color and also for people from the LGBTQ community, to be able to offer resources for mental health and for suicide prevention and awareness. The shirt I'm wearing is the Out of the Darkness walk shirt. Every October, the first weekend in October, we have an incredible walk outside of the Art Museum down Montgomery Drive. And we have thousands of people come out just in memory of their lost loved ones or just for the cause. That's going to resume in public, Lord willing, this October. But also even tomorrow night, there's a virtual training for understanding suicide prevention. I put the link on the Facebook post, but also if anybody's interested in the training, you can go to afsp.org and go to the Philly chapter. There's a free virtual training about understanding suicide prevention. It's called an Introduction to Suicide Prevention. And it helps people to understand how you can help other people who are screaming out of the darkness, you know what I mean? And be able to recognize warning signs. And it teaches you how to talk to people or how to listen to people when they're struggling with these types of thoughts. And then there's also a virtual campus talk coming up on April the 17th. And that's an opportunity for people who are college students or high school students to be able to walk in memory of people who have lost their lives to suicide, but also just honor the cause as well. And that information is also on the afsp.org website under the Philly chapter. I think this stuff touched me tonight, man, because I remember being a college freshman. So Phil, I'm a couple years older than you. Biggie and Tupac died my freshman year in college. And I remember going to college campus, they had these TVs in the basement of the dorm. In September of '96, Tupac died. And then the spring semester comes around in March of '97, Biggie died. And it was just such a year of like, it was crazy music, first of all, that came out. but it was such a challenging year. And remind you, there's no social media at this time. People barely had cell phones. So everything that's felt and expressed is in real time with real people having real conversations and experiences. And their losses, they were huge, man. It wasn't like losing like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X as far as like people who fought for certain things, but they still were icons in our community, and a loss is a loss, and it's a significant loss.
All right. In a lot of ways, they were as significant to our communities at that time, you know, because I mean, these were like, for better or for worse, no matter how you felt about the rhetoric, these were the preeminent voices in our neighborhood, in our generation. I actually, you know what? You were a freshman in college, 90, 95, 90, 96, 97, somewhere around there.
Yep.
That means, brother, you are older than I thought. I just knew you weren't as old as me because I was in high school. I was like a sophomore in high school in 95. So, so that surprised me. Like, what? How old is this?
Y'all not gonna do that.
But for our age group, though,
my son was born in 95. But yeah,
I got you.
Well, we knew about you though.
You know, I was old.
But no, John. But just for reference, I just turned 40 back in October.
Okay.
And so for like our age group, like these were the voices. Like among Black males, you had Tupac and Biggie, and then you might say like, honestly, I can't think of any voices in that mid to late 90s that were bigger and louder than those two. So yeah, I think that is actually a fair comparison in terms of how those individuals and their deaths impacted the community.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's important.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, and we talk about, you know, the impact of Tupac and Biggie from a perspective of being there. I was when I was in 8th grade when Pac died, so I was a freshman, and you know when Biggie died. No, I might have still been in 8th grade. Yeah, 97. But it's important to remember also, you know, like the King Vons and the XXX the people who I don't listen to their music, right? But King Von from Chicago did at 20, you know, murdered at 24 is the Biggie for, you know, the 16, 17, 19, 20, 23-year-old out there, you know, and it's important for us as the old folk, right, to be aware of that too. I remember when, you know, the rapper XXX died, and, you know, never listened to his music. You know, my son, he's like, you know, 21, and he's like, listen to him, you know, 17 at the time. And I'm like, for what? Why am I listening to him? You know what I mean? Like, and I go and listen to him, and here he is at 19, XXX, talking about depression, talking about anxiety, isolation, talking about all the things that I didn't talk about at 17, right? And then I started talking to my clients about it. They was all sad, crying, and, you know, because again, that impact, that influence. So for us older folk, it's important is that we keep up with what's taking place, because, you know, we want to be authentic and real with ours too, but we also want to be relatable and be able to relate to them.
That's powerful. I think, you know, as you guys were speaking and we're talking about age, the thing that comes to mind is, yes, they died at a young age, but they also accomplished a lot in a short period of time. And when you talk about generational icons, it makes me think back about how we just saw the story of Fred Hampton and the age that he was when he was murdered and assassinated. That
21.
The age of so many of our icons over time were all influential and oftentimes at their height in their 20s. And it just begs the question, where could our community be if they just lived a little longer? If we could just instill in our current generation, our younger folks, the importance of being alive so that you can transform and you can reach that next plateau. Because as you're sitting there talking about Biggie and Tupac, I'm thinking about, well, once they were gone, okay, he rose out of the ashes from that,
Jay-Z.
right? Jay-Z. And now look where he is, just in terms of just being allowed to survive and live and thrive. And so I just want to encourage the folks who are watching that, you know, we've got to continue to speak life into our young people. We've got to continue to figure out ways to show folks that it doesn't have to be ride or die. It doesn't have to be, you know, all or nothing. And that a lot of times when old folks like me, you know, start talking about when we were young, you know, we say that to say we took our lumps, you know, we had all of these conflicts. Something that was mentioned earlier was about teaching young people to go through conflict, experience that social emotional learning on how to navigate conflict, and then being alive on the other end of it to be able to practice those new things that you learn. And so I think that, again, I just cannot continue to stress enough how important it is that we speak life into one another. And to that end, as we're getting ready to wrap up, you know, I want you guys to share just one positive thing that has happened for you or occurred in your life since the last time we spoke to you. Something that you want to share with the rest of the community in terms of encouragement, happiness, where you are in your life with achieving some type of goal, whether it's like me, I lost 5 pounds, or whether it's something, you know, more major.
I found them. I found them.
All right, hold on to the
I
phone.
found about 15 of them myself.
I found like 10 of them too.
All right, I didn't say you know, I kept them off. But Charles, we haven't heard a lot from you. Tell us something that, you know, positive, uplifting that you want to leave us with tonight that you've encountered over the past year since we talked.
Man, the funny thing is, and the thing I would not have imagined a year ago, is that I have trouble picking one.
That's a good thing.
I have trouble picking one.
Hmm.
And I think that probably is the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. That there's been so much, you know. A year ago, we were going into this really strange, scary, unprecedented thing. And, you know, we were thinking about all the ways that this could ruin everything. And so the fact that we're still here, and no worse for wear. But for myself personally, I left a job, and this was the first time that I've ever actually left a job that the situation wasn't totally under duress. You know, like I had some say in when and how, you know, and I felt so much better. I've been able to start and pick back up so many projects, making a few dollars off of some of them, you know? And that is the biggest thing for me, is that I've made that big, huge change, and I'm okay with it.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Phil, tell us something that you want to leave us with.
I mean, I think something positive. So I started adjunct teaching at Delaware State University. So that was teaching is something that I always wanted to do. Started a doctoral program. It's been an interesting year with that, but
Dr. Phil.
Yeah, the Negro. You know what I mean? The Negro one, the real Dr. Phil. But yeah, you know, those are some things that I, you know, for a long time, I talked about accomplishing and goals. And so, you know, I was able to work to that. If they didn't happen, then I'm sure it would be something else, right? Because, you know, again, that bright spot, you know, in a cloudy day and all of that. And that's what I try to be, as optimistic as possible. You know, even in the midst of things like a pandemic, or, you know, I'm just seeing now a cop got shot in Logan. So now I'm like wondering, all the black boys and men go in the house and hide, you know what I mean? Just because of everything that takes place. But yeah, those are just two things that happened that went well for me.
Interesting. You know, I want to acknowledge something every time that you do share. I see your mindfulness about maintaining that balance, and I respect that and appreciate that, because again, we ask you, like, what's the worst thing that's happened? And you're like, you know, I'm
Yeah.
managing, it's going good. And even the good things, it's like, you know, we're gonna keep it humble, keep it subtle, keep it pushing. So I respect you, brother. Thank you so much
I
for that.
appreciate you.
Yeah, before I pass it to you, Ihsan, so we can wrap up, I just want to say, yeah, similar to what has been shared, I'm never would have imagined that I could share some of the positive things that have happened to me, considering where we started off last year. And so that's just a reminder for me, and I hope it is a reminder for everyone else that's listening and watching, that you know, again, trying to avoid cliches, but trouble don't last always. You know, this too shall pass. And just stick around. Just stick around. Try to survive, and it is going to get better. And so, again, part of our, you know, restarting this season of Wellness Wednesday for MBK Cares is really about, you know, our love for you as Black men and Black women and children in our community, and wanting the best for each of you, and wanting to share resources and tips and advice on you know, how to get to that next day and how to make it better than the last. So, Ihsan, I'll pass it to you.
I want to highlight that we had two things that happened after our show last year around this time. We both got our nonprofits off the ground too, Eric. I see you had the logo behind you, the Father and Circle, and MBK Cares became an official 501c3 as well. So those are things that are important. You know what I mean? Because those are things that allow us to leave certain resources for our community in a different type of way. So those are things that happen in the midst of all these ashes that were laid. I also wanted to just follow up on something you mentioned, Eric, and then close out about the interview. I actually got a chance to hear you interview someone earlier, and they were talking about the local newspaper and telling our own story. If there's anyone out there who enjoys writing or just speaking, any type of level of journalism or just blogging, whatever it is, please lend your voice to the truth. Like, because it's very important. As we were talking about Biggie and Tupac, I also was remembering how the media was fueling certain things there to make it this big East Coast versus West Coast thing. And whether that was magazine and urban media or whatever, it was still done through media to make it seem like California and New York were rumbling when they're thousands of miles apart. You know what I mean? And I think that some of those things cause things to escalate. So I encourage people out there who have the opportunity to share your voice or lend your talent to writing and speaking about truth in our community and just changing narratives. Please exercise that talent and use your time carefully, because you can shape the way people think with that, and you can shape the way outcomes happen within our communities. And you also can impact the normalizing of therapy and mental health, so that people don't look at things as taboo or things to be ashamed of. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our guests. I want to thank everyone who's participated by viewing us tonight. If people are going to listen to this content in the future, I appreciate you for following us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter at MBK Cares. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find every video from season 1 and season 2 and season 3 for instant replay. Please share it with others. I hope everybody out there takes time to take care of your mental health and to forgive people, to love yourself, to love other people, and just move forward living on purpose. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Charles. And Greg has gone on to be with his children. We thank you all for your time and lending your voice to this conversation. Wellness Wednesday, we're back. See you next week.
All right, everyone. Thank you.
All right, peace, y'all.
All right.